Here. Good afternoon. It is January 30th, 2025, Thursday afternoon, around 3 o'clock, and we are now joined by our treasurer, Mike Pichek, who we really appreciate you getting on very short notice, Treasurer Pichek, to talk to us about the $15 million that had been proposed to be sent back to your office, which we're short stopping at the moment.
Well, great. Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be here. Happy to maybe provide an overview and then take any questions that folks might have, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Yes.
So, a few years ago, about $20 million was appropriated to our office for the purpose of buying down the outstanding bonds or some portion of the outstanding bonds that the state of Vermont has. We did not do a bond issuance during the pandemic. And the first one that we did was actually when I came into office, first one we did in a few years in early 2023. A lot of the interest rate environment, significantly changed during that period and through 2024. And we're still living in this higher rate of interest to begin with today. So when we kept looking at our bond issuances and opportunities to buy down the $20 million worth of debt, we continued to defer and delay executing on it because we were earning more money on the cash in the fund than we were to buy down the bonds. And just to give you a sense of that, on the back, sort of a rough calculus, if you took $1 million and bought down the bonds, $1 million worth of bonds, we would save about $47,000 in interest over the life of that, bond. What we would be paying over time, the fact that we're paying it early, we'd be saving about $47,000, present value sort of for the life of that bond. Each year that we've held that $1 million since it's been appropriated to us, or at least each year since interest rates have been high, we are earning about $40,000 on that cash. So $40,000 or $50,000, sorry. So $50,000 a year on that $1 million. So if interest rates went up 2 years ago, let's say, we've earned over $100,000 on holding that cash versus a one-time saving of $47,000. So that sort of explains why we haven't, executed on the 20 million. Just to give you a sense of the scope, we have about $600 million outstanding in total state bonds. So 20 million is a fraction of that 60 million that's outstanding. And I'll also mention, in terms of the total savings, if you take that 47,000 and think about the entire 20,000 or $20 million being applied, that's probably a savings of roughly $1 million or so. But we are still able to achieve savings for Vermonters by refinancing our debt. So the most recent issuance we did in 2024, we were able to refinance bonds from 2014 and save about $3.7 million of interest over the life of those bonds from 2014 by refinancing them. So we continue to find ways to, refinance and save money without executing on the $20 million. And that, I imagine, will continue to be the case, as we look for refinance opportunities in the future. So thought that was important context just for the committee. In terms of the use of the money, when the flooding occurred in 2024, the reoccurrence of flooding, unfortunately, we had conversations with the administration about using some of these funds for flood-related activities, and we said that we would be happy to support that. We did say that as a general matter of practice, it's good financial responsibility to think about ways to buy down debt. So if we used it for this purpose, thinking about refunding that fund for its original intent would be good to do. Subsequently, we let the administration know that we think there's some flexibility there because it's really a policy decision. If they want to find an opportunity to replenish that fund, it's likely that we're going to let it sit there for the foreseeable future. Let's call it the next year or 18 months. It's really going to have to be an environment where it makes sense for us to buy down the bonds rather than hold the cash. So if you want to think about other uses for the cash, then from a policy standpoint, that, made some sense to us. The money, as you know, is scheduled to be repaid into that fund. I had a conversation with the chair about potential other uses, and I think it's in line with, what we told the administration, that, if there are other ideas for how to use that money that will have a more immediate impact, then that's something that we would have been open to. And the fact that many of the things that were discussed support housing, certainly a policy area that we've been very keen to support and try to find ways to provide additional resources to. So I'll leave it there, and happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Thanks very much, Treasurer Pichek. Any questions for the treasurer on this? Jim?
Sorry, I can't help myself.
It's okay.
Mike, thank you for joining us. So we talked earlier, and I appreciate, the fact that the money's sitting there and it's not a, maybe not a super high interest environment, although better than it was in terms of the money that we're making on that. I guess you said you won't probably need it for its original purpose for the next year, maybe a little bit longer than that. But don't we eventually have to backfill that money and pay it to? I mean, it's not just going to lie around for in perpetuity. I mean, it's going to have a need because we got to pay down debt.
Yeah.
If we don't, I mean, we're going to have to replace money somewhere else. No, am I looking at this wrong?
Yeah, so I think you think about the $20 million as sort of, the fact that the state had a lot of extra money at one point, particularly coming out of the pandemic with a strong economy and strong surpluses. And, it was my predecessor, Beth Pierce, but I believe the argument was, since we have extra money, let's use some of that to, buy down our bonds ahead of time. So the fund, it's again a policy choice of the legislature, wouldn't necessarily need to be refunded. This is extra money to pay down, bonds on top of what we normally are scheduled to pay them down in the normal budget process and the normal debt management process. So it does not necessarily need to be replenished. And that was sort of the argument that we were making, or the position that we were sort of foreshadowing a bit with the administration and with you all here today, that I think if there are other policy initiatives that can be achieved in the more immediate future, then that is something that we were certainly willing to explore.
What do we pay in rough terms a year in interest on our total indebtedness? You said 660 million. Did I hear that right? About
600 million.
600
million.
So
just a tick under.
Yeah. So what would you say we pay in interest each year?
Yeah. So when we present our budget, we'll have the specific amount because it's on our ups and downs sheet. But with the interest and principal, it's in the $77 million range.
Right. So
now that's not just interest; it's interest and principal.
Yeah. No, that's okay. So you'd have to separate out. I'm just thinking. I mean, if we lived in an ideal world, we wouldn't have any debt, and you would save payments that we could then use to the needs of the state and the programs and services. That's not realistic today, but the 20 million, I guess I looked at it, maybe one small part of paying down some debt, but I may be a minority of one on that. So, I think it's a fair outlook. I mean, if we could get, and this is relating to our outstanding bonds and our unfunded pension liabilities. Sure. We were able to get those down to zero as quickly as we could. We'd have a lot more money in the long run that's available and free for other investments. The 600 million or so that's outstanding, that is obviously a significant number, but in terms of unfunded pension liabilities, that is in the billions in terms of how we measure that. So just in terms of scale, the investments that we're making in the pension are really critical, and they've shown some progress and important to keep those up. But if you're measuring that in more of the $4 to $5 billion range, then the 600 million
It's just a fraction of that, just to put that into perspective. But also with the 600 million, one of the things we've done with CDAC, the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, for the last decade, really, and Treasurer Pierce had a real strong sense of doing this. And so far, we have continued in our office and with that committee in the same vein. But the recommendation has gone down each biennium. And as a result of that, and as a result of developing this concept of a cash fund where you would pay for some of your capital needs with cash instead of bonding, over time, that 600 million, will start to come down if we stay on that course. So it's something I think to keep in mind, that, the trajectory would be lowering that amount over time, considering that we're starting to get into an environment where we're issuing less debt than we did, a decade or so ago.
Thank you.
Dickinson, you have a question, I think? Yeah.
Is that me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
get you.
Okay, yes. Actually, you stole my question, Mike. I was going to ask you about the pensions, and I know that the more we can put in, the more it saves us money down the road and I was just going to say, that's a sizable piece. Just to ask if you had thought of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we just had a press conference at the beginning of the year to talk about the progress that has been made in the last 4 years on the pensions. And within those 4 years were the pension reforms that happened about 2.5 years ago. And we calculated, and we had our actuaries calculate, I should say, the savings over the next decade to 2 decades. So next decade with the pension system, and then the next 2 decades with the healthcare system, the OPEB. All the funds that the state has committed to putting toward those systems now, both in terms of fully funding the ADAC, the cost that we need now, and the cost that we need to pay down the unfunded liability. And then on top of that, we've made this ADAC plus payment of $15 million to both systems. To add that all up and think about what is the amount that we're saving over time by making those investments now. They just revised the number. It was already a significant number. We had it at about 5 billion plus, but it's just under 6 billion in savings and money that we don't have to come up with as the state of Vermont over time, because we made this commitment now to really aggressively start paying down those unfunded liabilities.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I've experienced when times are good, and I've experienced when times are really tight in the legislature. And I recognize how hard it is to even plan 5, 10, 15 years ahead. So what we do now may be great, but are we going to be able to keep that pace up over the course? I mean, we've had one that demanded exponentially more money, geometric progressions. And so,
well, the good news,
I look at it that way, is maybe we should put more money now. We have the money, but
the good news on that front, from a budgetary standpoint, is the absolute dollar that we'll need for the pensions will go up because of inflation and such. But if you look at it on an inflation adjusted basis, the most recent report that we submitted actually showed it starting to level out in the future years and then actually coming down a bit in the out years. So the number will get bigger as we get closer to 2038, which is the date that we'll have the pensions fully funded. The number will get bigger, but as a proportion to the budget, from a budgetary pressure standpoint, it should get more even over the next 5 years, and then beyond is the forecast. So obviously there's nothing that we pay closer attention to than the ups and downs of our pension system. And if things change, we will be the first to let folks know. But right now the trajectory looks very positive.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mike? Wayne?
I'm correct to assume that this money is a drop in the bucket, and it's nothing that would really have any impact on our bond ratings or the state's bond ratings or the bond capacity of the state. It's just too small.
Yeah, I think that's the fair representative. I mean, the two things that the rating agencies really care about for Vermont are unfunded pension liabilities and demographics. Unfunded pension liability, because they're concerned that if that gets too big, it crowds out all the other things in your budget, and you're starting to get into a position where you can't make those payments. Demographics, because they're worried that our workforce is going to continue to will get smaller, and revenues will
cool off and we won't have as robust of an economy with as much revenue in the future, which also puts us in a position where we might not be able to pay down, our bonds. But we've also had acknowledgement in our recent rating reports that Vermont is making progress on both of those issues for the reasons I said about pensions. And on the demographics, we have seen people moving to Vermont and our population rising a bit over the last 5 years. So those are the areas that will have an outsized impact. When we issue the CDAC report, that sort of capital debt affordability advisory committee that I mentioned, we take into account how much debt we have outstanding compared to other AAA rated states. So when we make that recommendation, it sort of outside of this $20 million really didn't factor in because it is a relatively small amount. And more the rating agencies are not just looking at that $600 million number, but those billions of dollars of unfunded pension together. So again, when we look at that together, it has a pretty marginal amount of impact. But that's a great question.
All right. Any other questions? Mike, thank you so much for coming in on such short notice. We really appreciate it. Let's just make our decisions, and we appreciate your collaboration. So enjoy the rest of your day. We'll let you off the hook, and we'll go on to other things now.
Sounds great. It's great to see everybody, and be in touch if you have any follow-up questions.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, this clear. Do you want to go next? The line. Okay. Anyway. We're getting copies of.
There are bubbles. There's been reference to supplemental sheets. The big sheet. We're gonna go back to the big sheet. We have a new big sheet.
It's online, I'm thinking. Like Spain.
I think it's mine.
Sweet. It's getting smaller.
Yeah. We don't do anything bigger than this, so the typing has to get smaller.
It's going to be in just a minute.
Thank you. Gotcha.
You want me to jump right in?
Yes, please.
Great. Okay, so for the record, Emily Byrne from the Joint Fiscal Office. So this is an updated version of the sheet we've been working from for the Budget Adjustment Act. There are a few things remaining open, and before we sort of dive into the individual line items, you will notice that there has been some more information that has populated on the bottom of the sheet related to revenue for the Budget Adjustment Act. So if we go all the way down to, in blue is where it sort of ended before, which was just a sort of summary of the appropriations pieces. In the pink orange boxes below is where we have the revenue for the budget adjustment. And similar to what's above in lines 80 through 85 is the sort of as passed, right? So this was the revenue that was available in the budget that was passed by the General Assembly. So those lines 80 through 85 aren't changing, but they're there to sort of show this is what was available at the time. And then below that is what has changed. So we have in line 87, the governor built the budget adjustment based on the revenue forecast that was adopted by the Emergency Board in July of 2024. And then there has since been a new revenue forecast. So that line in purple is sort of the first place to draw attention. For the budget adjustment, the House has a new revenue forecast. As I stated, that was adopted on the 22nd, I believe. It was an additional upgrade. And since we're going over and above the forecast that was used to build the budget, from there, there's an additional $227 million of general fund. If we compare that to the forecast that was adopted in July, that was the additional $63 million that's been talked about. So we include that in this construct. There's the next line in line 88 are the reversions, additional reversions, and I've got a supplemental sheet that we'll walk through, but you remember the very long list that was in the governor's language of all of those reversions.
I had the 8 million for DOL that we all remember. So.
Yeah, 8 million for DOL, the $5 from somebody else. I can't remember exactly where the $5 came from, but all of those changes. In this line, I have captured the what the committee just spoke about in terms of providing the judiciary spending authority for, I believe there's language around the 2 additional projects that we wanted. And this was the judiciary had provided those reversions to the administration with the intent that the money get reappropriated back to the judiciary, and the reappropriation didn't occur. So the transaction isn't really an appropriation to the judiciary per se. We're changing prior year language to make it an allowable spend and eliminating the reversion of that spending authority. So it's a little, technically it's carried a little differently than all those other things, but it'll
have its own separate language about that.
Yes.
Okay.
And it will not show up in that list of reversions anymore. So that total list will be less. And then the following line is there were some changes to the direct applications. I've also got a sheet sort of walking through what those are. And I know we've looked at those, but those are like the changes for sports wagering estimates, the changes on the liquor and lottery funds, and all of those changes are captured in the direct app changes.
And so, Emily, you have that in red, and I wonder if that was supposed to be in black.
It's confusing because it's a reduction in it maybe was supposed to be in black, but it's a reduction in available revenue. So it's a negative.
Okay, so maybe the other one should be in red.
The other one should also be in red. I can fix that. Red.
Okay.
For the final one. So after that, that brings the governor had $2.615 million of funds to work with when the budget adjustment was constructed. After the revenue forecast, it's 2.678 billion
to 63 million to it. That's the difference. Yeah.
Correct. And then the little bit of that in the change in the judiciary reversion. So in terms of the balance line, the big line in green on line 92, you'll recall in the governor's recommended budget adjustment, there is language that reserves any funds unallocated or non-appropriated at the end of FY 2025 goes into a little temporary reserve to be carried forward and utilized in the FY 2026 budget. That 87 million, because of the additional revenue forecast, goes up to about $144 million. And that was assumed available. Should note there are some C-section changes that you heard about today, and whether or not those are adopted in the budget adjustment or not will impact what that number is. But the assumption is that this amount will be carried forward to be utilized in the FY 2026 budget.
Yeah, Jim.
Emily, I'm trying to follow your numbers. And I understand the revenue upgrade.
Mhm.
So if I'm looking at this right, the 57.4 is 5 million less than the 62 point.
Yes.
So that suggests to me, and I haven't looked through all the individual line, we have spent in this plan 5 million more than the governor's recommend.
Yes, and that 5 million is the net of the additional 6 million that was put in for the that was
which they really.
Right, they did it.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't
Yes.
us.
I mean, I get the 14 million, they spent it by putting it back into treasury. And there's a proposal to spend it differently. So I get that. Okay, so
Yeah.
it's so the dollars essentially are
The same.
the same,
Yeah.
other than officially, because that 6 million came in late. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah,
I should have mentioned that.
Yeah,
We
I
didn't
know.
do that.
Yeah, up above, I should have mentioned that, but yes, that's the one thing that is, that's why it doesn't line up with the 63, otherwise it would be about 0. But there is a little bit left over from the state's attorney savings.
Right, the 140,000.
But that's it, that's the
Okay.
three.
And so, if we go up to the expense side, to the section of lines 30 through 57, we have 3 really open items, and one is the mixing bowl, which we're just gonna do at the end. So it's nothing for us to discuss on that one. It probably could be closed now, but we just like to wait till the very last second in case something comes up. And I've seen Lynn nodding her head, so she knows about that. The other 2 were proposals. Oh, there were proposals from Human Services Committee about reach up and caseload adjustments. And I've talked to the chair, and we're not going to accept those proposals. So we're going to keep what the governor proposed for those 2 areas. So unless I hear objections, that was fine with the chair of Human Services. We'll just close those out and keep them the way the governor originally put them in. So that really closes out everything in the base. And then when we get to line 59, we talk about the one-time adjustments. And that's where there's a little more action going on, right? I'm gonna wait till Emily finishes making her notes, so so do you want to just chat with us again about the one-time section there?
Sure. So in the one-time section on line 63 and 62, that's the additional $6 million for substance use and mental health facilities. So the governor originally had 4 million in the Department of Health as a one-time. The recommendation is to increase it by $6 million to $10 million and to move it to the Department of Vermont Health Access. So that's why it shows up on 2 separate lines.
And so, pause there for a second, Emily. Is that the right line title, substance use and mental health facilities? Is that called something else, really?
I think we should look at the language that was approved by the 2 chairs.
I don't think it's the right description.
It's not anymore, it's broader than that, so we can.
Higher stabilization.
Provider stabilization?
I think that speaks to it more fully. Because it's not just limited to those 2.
Right, yeah.
Got it. Okay, I can tweak that.
Yeah, that's a good title. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And so below that, on line 65.1 for DCF, this would be where we would add the extension of the cold weather exemption through June 30th. Below that, and because we keep all of the departments one times together, right? Which is why it kind of shows up a little.
0.1.
Yes. I don't know why I didn't think of this last year, but adding the 0.1 makes it a lot easier than making sure that you get I remember
change all
that row. It's a lot. Probably the best idea I've had all week. Online.
Some little things that make a difference.
Yes. On line 67 is where we have where the governor appropriated the funds for the bond redemption for the treasurer's office that was just spoken about. This line is zeroed out in the House version. And then below that are the 2 lines to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. The first 2.8 for the pilot project completion per Act 180 that's was outlined in Act 186. And then additional funding for VHCB for housing projects of 8.5 million. Below that. And I think my subtotals are not pulling through all the way correctly. The total on the bottom will be correct, but the subtotals. Yeah. On line 68 and on line 76. It is done, yes, line 68, I can get you new copies in line 58, but formulas didn't pull through, but the bottom line formula is correct.
It's correct.
Based on how I did it.
So at this point on the spreadsheet, we have essentially closed everything out except the use of the $14 million. You were going to give us a supplemental spreadsheet on other transfers for the 21-22.
Yes, and the other transfers one, Tony has at the copy room. It should come down, but I do have the supplemental sheet for the reversions that oh no, Aaron has it. We could start with either one. Yeah, let me know.
You didn't love spreadsheets before, you're going to learn to love them in this community. Thank you.
Is this a revision of the same sheet? I mean, I was only out for.
Yeah, well, you know, spreadsheets are us. This is the transfers and direct app changes. So she's taken line, this is not the reversions one. This is the other transactions, line 75.
Yes, this is line 75 is in the yellow.
Yeah.
So nothing has changed in the House version from the governor's recommend, but if you look at the bottom.
This is just a detail on that.
This is just the detail, right, for, to sort of tie it back to the big sheet. And if there were any
Yeah.
additional questions on the additional transfers that are occurring. One thing I will note, and I have gone back and forth with finance and management on this, is when you characterize something as a transfer versus when you characterize something as a direct application. And I'm not exactly clear on when this is where I get out of my lane in terms of like accounting standards and whatnot. But in some cases, we count things as direct applications, meaning they're directly applied to the general fund. And in some cases, through session law, you transfer it into the general fund.
net of these two together is line 75.
Just the yellow is line 75.
This is the 21-22, this line 75.
And the one on the bottom's the direct apps is line 89 is those changes. And this is what shows on those sheets in line 75 and line 89 are just the differences. The original governor's reckon as passed, they're the as passed numbers show up in the as passed sections above. And I can reconcile those if you want me to. I don't have it in front of me.
Passed it.
Yes. So that if you go to the fifth column, the difference from as passed in the yellow box at the very bottom says 21.22. That's where that 21.22 is on line 75.
So 18.5 million of that is that medical insurance fund that we had Beth Vestigi and Adam in to talk about yesterday. And if there aren't parentheses around it, that means it's coming back.
Yes.
So what is the VTHCF for 6.11?
Yes. So the two, and I will talk about the next two, the Act 181, Section 73 pieces.
Okay.
So these two is the transfer to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund and the Municipal Regional Planning Fund. When Act 181 happened, and this sort of goes back to the property transfer tax conversation. When Act 181 happened, these transfers happened in Act 181. The new language is in the Budget Adjustment Act, cleans it up and gets rid of the Act 181 transfers, and it's all sort of taken care of through the property transfer tax allocations. So you don't want to count it twice. So it comes out of the transfers. It's all taken care of on the property transfer tax side.
Okay. And then you'll also see the two above that, the VTTBI, that's the traumatic brain injury, and $1,500 doesn't make it, it's decimal dust. That's why it's zero. And then the wet fund is about 2.6 million, and so that was closing out those two accounts. So that's why those are positive numbers.
Correct. And yeah, the sort of if it says to a special fund, then it's then it's coming out of the general fund, so it's a minus. If it's coming from the other fund, then it's a positive into the fund.
So, Emily, I was a little confused. Maybe it was different. So Doug was in here talking about ERAF or ERAF, and then there's this ERAF here for 6.5.
I believe, I may need Maria since she was here. The ERAF conversation that you had with Douglas this morning was about updating the language that was presented in the big bill, right? This is the additional transfer that they believe that they need in FY 2025 to meet 25 obligations.
Okay. Okay, that's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Connect those dots. So any questions on the transfer page from everybody? Okay.
No, I don't have any questions, but did we kind of agree to all this at this point?
I think
I'm not
so.
following.
We haven't, this is not reversions. These are just the transfers.
Yeah,
And
no,
I know, that's
I
a
know.
good point.
I know,
I
we
think-
talked about the liquor fund, we talked about the sport.
Yeah, I think we've
fund.
closed most of certainly the direct apps. Is there anything on here that anybody wants to not close? Or can we close this sheet?
No,
I'm
I'm totally
just
fine
confirming.
with it. I was thinking, which is dangerous.
Yes.
Earlier, before you shared your plan for the 14 million,
Yeah.
I was trying to say, okay, well, what if we did, 16 million to pay for the insurance instead of 18 and a half to pay for the 2.8 for the disability housing. So that was just my internal thinking. And sometimes things circulate there and they don't go anywhere. Just asking.
Yeah.
We all march to a different drum, so just understand.
That's why we have diversity of thought is a good thing. Otherwise, we only need one of us. Lynn.
Okay, thank you. I'm confused.
I probably helped you with that.
Yeah, you were doing fine till Jim spoke up.
I'm taking notes frantically to try to get all these extra lines. I mean, I don't have the thing in front of me, which is obviously,
Right.
yeah, but we just had the treasurer come in. We have the $14 million that he's not going to need. I don't know what happened to the 20, but the 14 of that is not going to revert back to his or go be paid back. And this is mine, so I'm going to have to be able to explain this to people. Where did the 14 million go? You have a 65.1. Did it go to that? And what is that number? And where else did it go?
So you have the big a copy of the big spreadsheet in front of
The
you.
original. I have the
Yeah, and
original.
there shouldn't, the other thing that you should have is a very small spreadsheet, because I think Aaron put it up.
You may not have the ability.
I don't know, yeah, but you could look at it on your screen. That doesn't really help because I'm so far away.
You can't see us.
Yeah, I grabbed everything I could think of that I thought I'd need.
Okay,
I
so
didn't have
let
anything.
me just get, tell you where it is on the,
I can share it if that's.
why don't you share it for a
Yeah,
second?
that might be helpful, yeah.
Aaron, can you send me that?
It's the same one.
It's up there.
Okay. Okay, so 14 out.
Did you see that, Lynn?
Yeah, yeah. And so the total source, so we go down 14.19 is what
Right.
we're going to save or take out. And then
So
you
the-
take out the reversions from judiciary, which is also 0.85. These are the uses.
Right.
So
Right.
we're gonna reappropriate that, or whatever you wanted to call what you just said.
Right, so we're taking the 14 million, that's why we had the treasurer in, that was gonna go back from general fund to the treasurer's office. And then we had the additional attorney savings, because remember when they came in and they were gonna be charged all that money from ADS, and then there's just, turns out it wasn't gonna be so much, so this is a saving.
I got that.
So we have 14.19. And
That's the extend the call, that's the human service request to extend the winter thing through June to July
yes, the
1.
1.9, yes, is to extend the GA housing, the winter weather rules through June 30th. Then the 2.8 million is for that third project of the demonstration pilot, and the money needs to go through VHCB and then be directed. So we wanted to separate that out. And then the remainder was to go to VHCB for their regular kinds of funding. They have over 40 million in projects now. They have 13 million to spend. This would basically mean that they could fund 50% of the projects they have in their pipeline.
So the net balance is a reduction.
$140,000 left.
That's right. So that means you save, I guess.
We
Yeah, you
haven't
eliminate
spent
14.19, you add 14.05, you end up with a net of 100,000
Right, 140,000 left over.
left over. Okay. And
So
so
all that shows up in the big spreadsheet.
right.
In the yellow, the parts that Emily highlighted in yellow, in the one-time adjustments, and then the additional reversion on line 80.
Okay, yeah, I don't have that, but I
Okay.
made note of it. You added all these things that got as revenue that you added back. And so now the bottom net, you said that it was the same as on the other sheet, except I see on line 71 on the original, the total appropriation changes was 6 million. It was 63.53 for the governor and 69.53 for us. And the 6 million is the increase in that appropriation. Is that still correct?
I think so. The difference is, yeah, the 6 million for the provider stabilization.
Then you added, okay,
Yeah.
that's a different line, yeah.
Well, yeah, well, it's up there. It's included to get to that
It's
line
in-
71.
Yeah.
It's above it, because we took out the 4 million and we added 10, so that was the $6 million change, right?
Yes, yeah, that's right, 6 million, the provider stip, so that goes, okay, so then, so what does that do to the net for after appropriations and transfers, and what's the net?
Well, according to this spreadsheet, we're reserving almost $145 million for FY 26.
$145 million for 2026, okay.
So that really is what the governor had reserved, plus the 62.43 million, the revenue upgrade money.
That was from,
So we didn't spend any of the revenue upgrade.
that was the one from January,
Yes, the one from
okay,
last week.
yes.
So we did not spend any of the revenue upgrade in this budget.
Right, okay, all right. Okay, all right, I think I got it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Emily, was there anything else for you? We've sort of gotten this one through. I mean, we've kind of gone through everything, I think, on these, right?
I think so.
And I think so the last thing that we have to, that we'll decide is on the 14 million. So, which is.
And I also brought, I don't know if I have a summary of the reversions.
Sure.
You want to look at that, which is
Yeah,
this.
and then this will be up on the,
Yeah, I can share this one.
we could just nail
All of
it. That's right.
It's kind of like a collection.
Yeah, that could be a new art collage, right? Yeah. Pretty soon Dave is gonna have somebody listening in on our sheets, to hear what we're gonna do from.
want to see the look on his face when the screen is.
That's drilled into the wall.
Except with.
So I'm disappointed that, so after all of the pomp and circumstances ended, I'm noticing that there's a coat rack in the colonial office, right there in the outer office, and we haven't grabbed it for us yet. Very, very empty the last 3 or 4 days, since the budget speech.
So we could go in that.
Just
saying.
I am. You got a power to walk in there and take it. No question.
And in the meantime, we'll look at BAA reversions.
Madam Chair, I'm gonna excuse myself. I have to meet Senator Watson.
Okay,
I mentioned it yesterday.
yes, you did. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Will we see you after sometime?
Tonight,
Yeah. You coming back or you done?
be back around 8 o'clock.
Oh, okay, never mind.
That's gonna be done, but
Still eating.
Depends on Jim. Yes, thanks, Dave. Okay, versions.
So this summary sheet just takes that large list that was in the governor's recommended language, tries to put it in a spreadsheet, but there were some reversions in the version that passed, about $13.1 million worth of reversions. The governor added about $19 million or $19.7 million worth of additional reversions to the Budget Adjustment Act. The House has accepted most of those reversions, as I understand, unless there are other changes we need to make, with the exception of the 2 judiciary, the Essex Courthouse renovations and the HVAC Systems Act.
We actually haven't had a conversation about the reversions as a committee. So what was your question?
So, we covered it yesterday, maybe we did, but we talked yesterday about transfers, like when a fund is full of water and we need to transfer money into it, as opposed to appropriating the money, because then we have to pay
Money to the debt service.
for the debt,
For the
for the
reserves.
reserves, right? But it just occurred to me when we do reversions on money, and then it gets reappropriated.
Oh. I know where
Are
you're
we
going.
paying on that? I don't know that it's a
We pay
big.
twice?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Are we paying for the statutory reserves twice? Because, I mean, just pick a number.
We paid 10 million the first time,
Right,
or for 10 million.
yeah, and then, well, we didn't need all 10 million, so, 3 million comes back. And now we reappropriate that 3 million with some other use. We pay, quick question.
That's a good question. And
Maybe I'm overthinking this.
I think it's a very good
it's a
question.
good question, and I believe the answer is no, because the the amount that we put into the reserves is based on the amount that is appropriated in total from one year to the next. So when you you reserve against it sort of the first time. And if it's a one-time, well, so in this, to figure out how to explain this correctly on the fly.
Maybe when we do, as part of the definition, it's net of appropriations, net of transfers and reversions.
No, I think what's complicated, confusing about it, I think, is when it gets, so this, there's always reversions
I
in the
don't have
budget.
an answer right now, I'm just
Yeah, there's,
too much.
No, it's just funding.
it's just against spending authority.
So all it is your spending authority is being reverted.
Okay, yeah.
Cash money moving around.
Right, but the reserves are against the appropriations from that fiscal year.
So it's not moving money, it's just the appropriate, the funding authority, right? Pulling the funding authority back.
Let me think about a creative way to explain it.
Yeah, okay, a little project sometime.
I think it's you appropriate it once and then you reserve against it, right? And if you think about that money then sits in the reserve, right? And then when you move if you do the appropriation again, that money is still in the reserve against that appropriation, right? If you think about it from a base appropriation perspective, right, that's what's effectively going on, right? Because we've got when we add money to the reserve, we're only adding money for the change from the prior year. So you're not, we don't do $100 million every year. We're doing whatever that difference
That makes
is.
sense. Okay,
That's how I would think about it.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So this sheet has a sort of right, I don't know that it's been agreed to yet, but the judiciary courthouse thing
Right.
is out on this.
Right, that's the only, we haven't done, yes.
So this doesn't include, right, the ones we just approved, which were on this sheet, B 320 and 321.
They were,
Because those were open until just,
Yeah, those are appropriations. These are just the reversions that are online.
these were reversions in these two. It was
a reach up.
DCF and it was reach up and it was general assistance.
Yeah, and I think
They lumped into something.
I think this may be a language. Do I have it up and down?
Sorry, just
No,
want.
no worries. From the perspective of how they're carried in the big bill, those ones are reductions to appropriations versus. What's on here? Versus reversions of prior year spending authority in the same way.
oh,
So a reversion is, you use the term reversion if it is prior year, if it
Yes.
involves years, oh,
Yes.
golly, I didn't, thank you.
keep learning.
Yes, that's an important, these are all old spending authority. And was authorized in prior fiscal years.
Well, there wasn't spent.
Right, right, I just used reversions.
More broadly.
Yeah, much more broadly, and that's okay.
So we could take a quick look at some of these. We have legislative council, joint fiscal committee.
Yep, and those ones are all as passed.
Oh, yeah, so those are, so it's change. I should be looking at their change. So $199.34. Everybody okay with that? The health equity, they actually had to revert and then they put somewhere else, so we already approved that. I don't know a lot about this tuition assistance, DHR position. The two DHR positions. There's a lot I don't know a lot about. Were there explanations of these in the?
I don't know if there were.
It's somewhere highlighted in the line.
Well, the $8 million reversion, we heard about from the Department of Labor. We were not gonna get everybody in to hear about the reversion, so I don't know if you all looked at your reversions for the ones that you have and have anything to say about those. We did have, Commissioner Bolio in from tax. And he talked about reversions, the 1.267 million tax operation costs, because they didn't need as many positions as they thought they would need related to childcare. The, no, it's 1.267. The 3.5 is other positions. Yeah, special fund, general fund didn't need the money for the IT. There was different places where they didn't need the money, two different places. And then the other were around reappraisal and listings and tax use and renter rebates. They think people aren't just using it, they're still using other federal funds and other things like that. So I think we got what we needed about from the tax group, which is tax operation costs, the tax positions. But do we know anything about, in the 2753 reserve, we have to. Well, that wasn't a change, never mind, I'm gonna stop that. And the health equity renew, so I don't know what the tuition assistance program.
Get a little more on that one. Unless Maria, do you remember what that one was?
So that was tough because that's I think that was a one
Oh, really?
time. I mean, is that, I've got
Okay, so you could find out that. Yeah,
I mean, I can fill you in on one down on the end of page 2, that DEP relocated remote working. I think because.
right,
They gave away $3 million already, and like just this, and there may be applications outstanding, but.
right,
it's-
that's all that's left, right,
I don't know where, in what part of ACCD everyone needs is in.
okay. And the DHR, I think are yours,
Yeah, those are just, positions that didn't get filled.
okay. So it's kind of like vacancy savings.
Yes, but cash. But yeah, they're just positions.
It was, if it was in the budget, right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And am I correct in saying, so when the BAA was put together and all of these reversions were where the administration said, okay, we're gonna revert through 2 pages of stuff. They're taking this
19.7.
19.749 million and incorporating, they're automatically respending it.
Yeah.
In this proposal.
Right. And anything that isn't, yeah, the difference between a carry forward and a reversion is a carry forward you keep because you're going to use it for the same purpose just later. A reversion is you're not going to use it for the same purpose, and if you want to repurpose it, you first have to revert it to the general fund. It's too, and then.
Right, but
use
even
it.
even the same universe of purpose. So as an example, and I'm not advocating for anything, but just as an example, the Everyone Eats program was, I believe, a COVID related program. I don't know what the
Mhm.
defined details are, why there's 147,000 left over, but you're saying, but there, you can't revert that and say, oh, that would go really well with the childcare fund, food program. That's irrelevant. Where it goes is
Yeah, that's all.
irrelevant. It's just going into the
Big
lake.
pool, right, big pool, lake, sure, the billion.
Okay.
So money's been appropriated in previous years to each one of these.
Not in previous years, in the last year's budget.
Yeah, I know, but when we get a reversion, they could be reverting money from more than one fiscal year, is that correct?
Yes, they could
be old.
These categories, it could be 2 or 3 fiscal years being wrapped in it. This money is being reverted. And so they no longer have that budget authority. It's going.
They don't have
back.
any spending authority on that. It's coming back to the general fund and being reused,
It could be repurposed.
like
then.
recycling.
So instead of only limited to this purpose, when it comes back and you appropriate it again, it could go into other purposes.
If you wouldn't do it, you'd take it back because you're not going to use it for the same purpose. Otherwise, you'd carry it forward and keep it in that account. But if they don't need the 8 million ever in Department of Labor, they take it back and they'll spend it in human services and public safety and, wherever. So it just, this is where what they're taking back from these areas because they don't need them. And they have, presumably talked to all the departments. And so it's just a matter of whether we think there's any sort of issue. If we think there's an issue with any of the particular reversions, we did on the judiciary, but if with anything else, then that money is no longer available to spend wherever it got spent, and we'd have to cut somewhere else. Lynn, thank you.
Oh, okay, yeah, I just want to ask something, this goes back a little bit, this is interesting to listen to, but the GA extended 1.9 million and
Yep.
the reach up, which
We're not
was,
changing the reach up program That was a request originally in the, in the human services budget, but we are not
Okay, not doing
doing
that.
that. No,
All right. Let me just ask then, the GA extension to June 30th, is that one time?
yes.
Okay. Are any of these others one time?
All of the things that are highlighted in yellow, they're all one time.
Okay.
Because we're using the 14 million, which is one-time money. So
Okay.
none of it is base.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. So we don't need to go down each one of these. I mean, there were some big ones on here. If anybody has a question about any of them, the big ones we kind of talked, because we talked to tax and we talked to Department of Labor. And we, the health equity in the courthouse. We did, so is there anything else on here that anybody has a particular question about? We talked about the Green Mountain Care Board one, that was an implementation, they didn't need the money for that purpose. I'm just looking at anything big. And our admin management and planning for 402. Do you know anything about that one, Trevor?
No, I had asked Deputy Secretary about that, but I hadn't gotten a response.
Oh, okay.
I'll follow up.
I'd be just curious to know. I don't think we're gonna change it, but I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna change it.
Right. Right, okay. So we can officially vote on these tomorrow. We'll just have everybody see that that's what that is. And are those all the numbers for right now, Emily?
That's all I have for.
No more spreadsheets for
That's
this?
it.
We don't want to make it around the
It's not
clock?
so bad.
All right. Thank you very much, and we'll call Grady up for some language. Great. Yes, why don't we go apply for 5 minutes?